Hi, all. I'm Susie Reynolds. I am the manager of strategic advising initiatives here at Wayne State.
And I'm Kate Bernas, Senior Director of University Advising.
Our presentation today is going to talk about probation and how it works at Wayne State. This training was created to help advisors and other people at Wayne State that support students on academic probation by giving information on how the process works for probation at Wayne, and then also give some strategies for recovery for students or supporting your students through recovery. We're going to talk about both the art and the science of probation. So, we're going to start with the science part of probation and really just how all of the details are, how you work through stars with probation, and just all of the important, like, numbers stuff in there. So go ahead and to get started with that, we're going to think for a minute about who handles probation in your department. So if you need to pause this video, you can to think this through, or if you need to ask questions to your supervisor. But who handles probation for your department? Is it department level, dean's office level? Is there one specific person? And do you have opportunities to consult with other people around you when supporting students on probation? So go ahead and pause this and continue playing once you have the answers to those questions.
Okay, so part one on university probation, like Susie said, is really going to be about the science of it, the mechanics of it. We're going to talk about where to find certain key data points in the STARS platform when looking at an individual student's profile. We're going to spend a little time talking about academic standing or academic statuses. Those are critical data points for probation. We want to talk a little bit about understanding your specific school or college and how they handle probation, because it might be different depending on where you work. And then Susie's going to talk about calculating GPAs. So let's start with talking about the information in STARS. So I'm going to talk through a few different key data points that I look at when I pull up a student profile, and I know the student's on probation, or I have an advisor that is asking me questions about probation. I look at these key data points to help me put the whole picture together, because to really understand where the student is, and if you are able to make a decision on the student regarding probation, whether they can take another semester, whether they're going to be excluded, you need to pull a lot of different data points together to get a full understanding. So the first place that I usually go to when I pull up a record is the courses tab. I want to see, first of all, their cumulative GPA. So the really nice thing about the courses tab is it has right above where all the registration information is, it has a table that shows the students' current cumulative GPA and the quality points and GPA credits that make up that GPA. Then underneath that, I can look at what the student is currently registered for. And depending on where you are in the semester, I might be able to see midterm grades at that point. That's a really critical piece of information to see where the student's at. I can also look to see their past registration. I might want to see if any of those courses they're taking are repeats. So I'm going to look further down into what they've already taken to see if any of them are repeats and might replace a low grade. I would also want to look big picture at everything the students taken to see kind of their grades and what things they've repeated already. Get a big picture understanding of where the student is, and how deep of a probation situation they might be in. I will often add a column to the courses tab. I will often add an original grade column, because it will show me what the original grade might be. Like for instance, if a grade is now an F, I might want to see if that was originally an incomplete, or if it was always an F, or if there's been any grade changes on the student's record. And also, this is a little insider tip. At those end of the term days when you're waiting for grades to come in so you can see what the student's GPA might be, the original grade column will show you the grade that the professor enters before it rolls onto the transcript. So it might just be 12 hours early, but you might be able to like see what that grade's going to be when it rolls onto the transcript the next day, and it can help you kind of make some decisions at that point. Any eyes in the repeat column will let me know if the repeat's been processed, and that original grade will have an E next to it, indicating that it's been excluded from the GPA. And then the final attempt will have an I, letting me know that that grade has been included in the GPA. If you do not see that E and that I next to the original and then the subsequent repeat, that's an indication that the repeat has not yet been processed. You might not need to do anything. It might get processed, the next day, but you need to then manually calculate that repeat to know what that student's GPA is going to be. If the students repeated the course more than once, you might see a couple E's, meaning a couple excludes, and then that final attempt will have that I, that it's being included in the GPA. Sometimes you might catch a repeat that has not been processed. If you do, just send an email to records maintenance at wayne.edu, and they will take a look themselves and make any adjustments to the student's record. So before you make any decisions on a student, you need to make sure all the grades are in for the term, and you need to either manually calculate repeats or make sure those repeats get calculated so you can really determine what that student's GPA is at the end of the term. Yeah, so every time a grade comes in, that GPA in the courses tab will adjust. But you don't want to make the mistake of assuming that that is the final GPA if a grade has not yet been entered. The next place that I go to once I look at all the grades is the academic tab. The academic summary will show me the actual accurate history of the student's academic standing. So I will want to see, what the status that the student has earned at the end of each term. If a student's been on probation multiple terms, I'm going to be looking for that P1, P2, AE. I'm going to be looking for certain statuses in the academic tab. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those later. And it will give me a full picture of where the student is. Those academic statuses get placed after the end of the term, and they stay static. So even though the student might have grade changes or medical withdrawals or repeats that not repeats, or incompletes that get finalized, those academic statuses will stay static, and it will show me what that progression is or has been in the past. So I'm looking at past and present statuses on past terms. I'm also looking at the holds. So in the academic tab, I will also see the hold table, and I can look at a full historical record of all holds that the students have. The holds are a really important thing to pay attention to. I'm not only looking for probation holds, I'm looking for exclusion holds. I'm looking for dean's office holds. It might look like a DE hold. In many cases, I might be looking for holds that indicate that the student needs final grades. I might be looking for Phoenix holds. So all of these different kinds of academic holds will give me a full picture of where the student is in relation to probation. I want to also point out that a lot of times I'll get advisors that contact me that say, the student wants to drop a class, but they have a probation hold. It is important to know that courses can be dropped with holds. You just need to email registration. Um, and they will drop the classes for the student. So you email registration@wayne.edu. The student can do that themselves and request to drop a class. Holds do not have to be lifted to drop a class. The student cannot add classes, but they can definitely drop classes with holds. The other place I might go to is the GPA summary. That's also in the academic tab, and that's a full table, again, showing me the cumulative GPA and also quality points and GPA hours that will help me calculate the GPA and see kind of a historical rep table of what their past term and cumulative GPA has been. The third place that I will look with the student on probation is their comments tab. Again, I'm getting a full picture of the student's record and grades and courses and holds. I want to also see what comments have been made by advisors that have worked with the students. So one of the key things I'm looking for are any advising records and the comments made there. I'm looking for information maybe on the Phoenix program. So if I see that the student has a Phoenix hold, that tells me they're probably a Phoenix student. I will go to comments and look for any detailed comments about the student's participation in the Phoenix program. Anything related to the student being on an improvement plan, so an IP or other contract with a school or college or department that an advisor may have just talked about in a comment. I might see an attachment with an improvement plan. That tells me that the student is working actively with an advisor and to get off probation, and they might, be kind of given some grace as far as their timeline to exclusion. Might want to note if the student's has been reinstated that semester. So this might be their first term back after having been excluded for a year or maybe more. That would help me kind of understand that they're in their first semester back and that they are working with a school, college, department, dean's office. Anything having to do with medical withdrawal or TFAB information, these would be those banner comments that get pulled in. What that might tell me is, if grades have been removed, but the status and the GPA has been adjusted, maybe they have a higher GPA, but the statuses are telling me the student's on probation. There might need to be some changes with the statuses. Because the med withdrawal process, the TFAB process, when grades are removed, we usually hold that student harmless when it comes to probation. So we might want to roll those statuses back to align with a higher GPA that the student might be above a 2.0 all of a sudden after a med withdrawal. Incomplete grade updates will also be in banner comments as well. So just looking for evidence of contact with advisors, that the student is actively engaging with advising and working to get off probation. Same with academic support and coaching. Any evidence that they are actively working with a coach or getting tutoring or SI and are really engaged with, helping them get off probation. So now we're going to talk a little deeper about that academic status or that academic standing. They're used interchangeably, but this is a really key data point to talk about and try to understand when it comes to working with probation students. So academic statuses are, we kind of use a shorthand, P1, P2, AE. These are the key statuses that get applied to a student's record at the end of the term. They are term specific, and they reflect the student's academic standing as a result of that term. So there are certain rules that the registrar's office uses to look at the student's record, at their cumulative GPA, and at any previous statuses. So P1 would go to P2 if the student stays on probation after a second term. And then after their third term, P2 will go to AE. So that's the general progression that the registrar office uses with a student below a 2.0. P1 will go to P2, and then P2 will go to AE. So if the student remains below a 2.0 over those semesters. They are automatically placed by the registrar's office about a month after the end of the term. So you will see usually a dash when it comes to the student's academic status during the term because we don't know what it is until the term ends. And it does take about 4 weeks for statuses to run after a term. So, but once they run, they pretty much look like these common statuses on the screen here. Regular status is pretty straightforward. RS, regular status, students with a GPA 2.0 or above will have that status applied. And many students just stay regular status the whole time. You might see good standing, a 0-0 good standing. That is a very particular status that gets placed generally in the student's first term when there is no real GPA. So the student isn't on probation, but all of their grades or marks are W's or an S or a U or an NC. There's no real grade to calculate a GPA, so the system places a good standing status. Then you'll see a P1, which indicates the student's first term below a 2.0. So previous statuses have been on regular status, or if it's their first term and they don't have a previous status and they go below a 2.0, you'll see a P1. The next consecutive term below a 2.0, you'll see a P2. The third consecutive term below a 2.0, you will see an AE or academic exclusion status. The AE status is just that. It's a status. It does not necessarily mean the student is formally excluded from the university. That is a decision and a process that has to be done by the school or college, and it may or may not be the case for a student with an AE status. You will often see AE statuses for students that are returning. They've just been reinstated, but their past most recent status from a year ago is AE. Possibly a Phoenix student is returning and their most recent status was AE. You might see a student that is on an improvement plan that has that AE status, meaning that they're rolled to an AE in their third term, but they are actively working with their advisor, their school or college to get off probation. Maybe things are starting to head in the right direction. They're on an improvement plan, and the goal is not to get excluded, but that AE status still shows. GPAs change over the course of a term, often reflecting repeats or incompletes that get changed to a letter grade. So you might often see changes in a GPA, or the GPA might go up or down. But generally speaking, statuses do not change. So even if a grade changes or incomplete changes or something, a med withdrawal goes through that changes the student's GPA, oftentimes the statuses do stay the same. They don't change. So it might not completely align with the GPA that you're seeing. And we're going to talk a little bit more with some cases in a minute. But it's important to kind of look at the statuses in relation to the GPA when you're looking at a record. So those statuses stay static. And there are certain circumstances where we might hold that student harmless and statuses are manually adjusted or rolled back. Things like med withdrawals, or back during COVID, we did not advance probation for a couple terms. So those are just a couple examples of where we might not progress probation or roll it back. But generally speaking, the statuses P1, P2 are what we look at to see where the student is in relation to being excluded from the university. So I just mentioned this a little bit. If the statuses do not align with the GPA, this is where you want to pull in that person in your school, college department who handles probation, and you want to talk about this case with that person. So, like I said, most of the time it's due to repeats or incompletes. So, just a couple examples on the screen here, and then we're going to look at some in stars. But let's say a student finishes a term with a 1.0 GPA. They have two Fs and one B in that semester. So they come out of that semester with a P1 status. And then the subsequent semester, that student will retake those two F grades in that second semester. And the GPA then adjusts. They get that include for those repeated grades, and then they exclude from that first semester. So those two F grades are now removed from the student's GPA. So that original term that had the two Fs and the one B, once those two Fs are removed, it will just be based on that one B. So that first semester will look like a 3.0, but it will have a P1 status. So that's an example of where the GPA is changed because of those repeats, but the P1 status stays. Another example is a student that finishes a term with two C's and an I, an incomplete. So they have a 2.0 for that semester and a regular status. They're not on probation. But a year later, the student has not done anything about that incomplete, and a year later, that I turns to an F. And now that GPA is below a 2.0, but it still shows a regular status from that term. So all subsequent terms are going to adjust with that F now being in the GPA. It's going to continue to affect that first term and every term subsequent for that year that has passed since that grade changed to an F. So now that first semester is a 1.33 with that regular status. And when we see that, we will go back in and we will adjust that status to reflect that that P1 for that semester, and subsequent terms will have to be made manually. So probation decisions, things like holds and exclusions, are made based on the GPA at the time status is run. So it can often work to the student's favor. That incomplete is, we don't wait for that incomplete to come in a year later. We honor that regular status, and the student moves on to the next term, no holds. We don't have that information with what that incomplete grade is going to be. So we make probation decisions at the time that that the status is run, and we don't wait for things like incomplete grades to come through. The other thing to note is that academic statuses do not appear on a student's official transcript. So despite the P1s, P2s, other statuses, if a student were to request an official transcript for a job or a grad program or whatever, those statuses will not appear on that transcript.
Okay, so having gone through a couple of pieces of information in the PowerPoint, we wanted to also show you some of these things in stars. Let me make sure this is full screen here. Oh, it's as full screen as it's going to get. We're going to see the bottom of that PowerPoint, I guess. Okay, so we're going to first look at our first student here. And just to point out the tabs that Kate talked about earlier, we have our academic tab, that academic summary. It also has that GPA summary and our holds in here. We have the courses tab where you can see all the WSU courses as well as your transfer courses, and then the Commons tab that was mentioned earlier. So for this student, we're going to go to the courses tab, and this student, we are looking at an F grade that was excluded. And so the GPA looks different than what the status run at the time is. So if we look at this 2024-01 semester, the student had a 4-credit F grade course and a 1-credit A minus grade course. The F course, she ended up repeating, which you can see the repeated course right here in the next semester. And so this F grade is excluded with this E, and this I grade, or this second included grade, you can see with the I, was also the same, but this GPA is no longer here for this semester. And we can see that going to the academic tab, going to GPA summary. If we look at her GPA summary for that semester, it says that her GPA was a 3.67, which with the 4 credit F and the 1 credit A, it would not have been that GPA. So it looks a lot higher than it was. We can also go and look at this student's academic summary for that semester and see that it says that she was probation 1, and it says she has a 3.67 GPA. So that might cause you to say, like, wait a second, that's not probation. But we have to remember, going back to that courses tab, that she had a 4 credit F that semester that's no longer included in the GPA, even though it was included in the probation status when it was run after this 2024 winter semester. The next student that I want to take a look at, we're going to also start in the courses tab. And the first thing I'm going to do with this student is what Kate had suggested in one of those PowerPoint slides there. I'm going to go to edit columns, do the drop down, and find that original grade and press close. So you can see all of the student's original grades over here. For this student, it's helpful because she has a couple incompletes that are now grades, so we can see those there. And I'm going to scroll down for this student to 2017-01. So you'll see for this semester, it's very similar to that last student where she has the F grades here in 2017-01. Both of those F grades are excluded now. And so going into her academic tab, we could look at GPA summary or the academic summary, but that 2017-01, she was on probation, but she had no credits, it says, in the semester. That's because both the classes she took that semester, she ended up repeating, and so it's excluded from that GPA. I do want to take a quick look back at the courses tab because this student is a really good example of where this summary does not make sense. So her academic summary, she has 53 attempted credits, 26 earned credits, 31 passed credits, 28 GPA credits, 41 quality points, and then a 1.47 GPA. So when you're looking at the GPA, really these last 3 columns are all that's important. But when you're trying to figure out what's going on with this GPA, sometimes taking a look at these classes is helpful. So this student, you can see that the earned credits and passed credits are different. A lot of the times these two numbers will be the same. Where it's different is if you scroll down to here, you'll see that she has some of the UNC and the BNC courses. Those are credits that were passed, but they're not technically earned credits. They're not counting towards the GPA at all. And the reason the GPA credits and the earned credits are different is because she has 2 credits that are counting towards her GPA, but she has an F grade in them. So they're going to show they're going to show in GPA credits, but not in earned. And then the last student here is a good example. In the courses tab, you can see that this student, we're going to look at this original grade column, which kept for me. And you can see that in 2022-01, this student had an incomplete grade that turned to an F. The other 2 courses in the semester were both C grades. Oh, and she had a B minus grade up here for that semester. So she had over a 2.0 GPA in that semester, but this F would have brought her just below that 2.0. So if we go over to, I think it would have brought her just below that 2.0. If we go over to that GPA summary for 2022-01, you'll see that she's at actually a 2.3. So she's still a little bit above that 2.0, but she would have had a lot higher of a GPA before that F grade was placed in there. We will do some GPA calculation stuff later on, so we'll wait for that, and I'm going to go ahead and continue with the PowerPoint.
Okay, Another status I just wanted to talk about that you might see is P3. So it used to be that statuses would run P1, P2, P3, P4. But we did decide to stick with a three status progression, P1, P2, AE, for all schools and colleges at the undergraduate level. And we also decided as a university that different schools and colleges, people that handle probation, can use the P3 um, as a kind of a placeholder when they don't want to exclude a student. They don't want to have the AE showing up in a report, and they want to manually change the AE that would normally be there to a P3. And this would indicate to somebody looking at that report that that student is working on an improvement plan with an advisor, with a probation person in a school, college department, and that their grades are heading in the right direction. They're working on doing all the things that they need to get off probation. Maybe they changed colleges and changed their major out of something that wasn't a good fit, and they just need a little bit of time to restore their status to regular status. So we will manually apply a P3. um, and then if that student gets off probation, P3 will go to regular status. Regular status trumps everything once the student gets above a 2.0. But the P3 will stay P3. It'll continue P3, P3, P3 every semester until the advisor or probation person decides to either exclude the student and manually change the P3 to an AE. Or if the student gets off probation, it will automatically go to RS, regular status. So that should let you know, if looking at a student's record and you see a P3, odds are they are working closely with somebody regarding their probation situation. And it should be obvious in the STARS notes. You might see improvement plans uploaded, notes related to waiting for final grades. You might see dean's office holds indicating final grades are required before the student can register. That's all part of what we do when we work with a student at that level of probation. And then finally, the statuses that you see at the top of the screen here are no longer used. But if you have a student returning from a long time ago, and you see P3 plus or P4 or P5, that to me says, oh, this student's coming back from a long time ago when we used to use those statuses, and we need to like manually calculate what the status should be in our current like nomenclature. Should they be an AE? Should they be a P3? Should we change them, to something that would allow them to kind of be part of our current, what we normally see when it comes to statuses. And so your probation person will be able to manually adjust that. And then CR is college probation. Really, the only place I see it anymore is the College of Education, because even though university probation is below a 2.0, the College of Ed considers anybody below a 2.5 to be on College of Ed probation. So they use the P1, P2, but anyone between a 2.0 and a 2.49 is going to get that CR, meaning they're not on university probation, but they are on college probation. Okay, understanding your college. So, like I said, not all colleges are the same. You might be working with a student who's transferring in from another college, or maybe plans to go to another college, maybe from engineering to fine arts, or from fine arts to liberal arts, or from business to liberal arts, or something like that. So every school handles probation differently. And it's just kind of good to know a little bit about that when it comes to working with a student who is either transferring in or from going from your school or college to another one. They might need a little bit of preparation around the fact that, you have not excluded them. You have not removed them. You might be dismissing them from business or engineering, but you're not formally excluding them from the university. They're going willingly, or maybe because they're being dismissed from your professional program, they're going to another college. They might need to know that they could be up against exclusion at that new school or college. And so even though it's a good move to change your major to something that might be a better fit, they need to make sure that they understand that they need to work within that new school or college and their probation processes. So oftentimes I can just speak personally for myself when I have a student that's coming in, maybe from engineering or from, business or someplace where maybe it wasn't a great fit. We understand that they might need a little bit of extra time and they might have courses that they took that they're not going to repeat. Engineering is a good example. Again, we're not going to make them repeat an engineering class if they're now going to be pursuing economics or philosophy, So we might take that student that's a P2. That would be a good opportunity to put them on an improvement plan and give them that P3 status so that we can give them a little bit of a grace period to bring up their GPA. A lot of that's going to depend on, that student being willing to, follow the advice of our probation team and make sure that they are repeating the classes we want them to repeat and taking some new classes and, doing all the things to make sure that they're getting off on to a good start with their new major. And students that are returning from exclusion that want to come back, they might be trying to get back into the program they originally were excluded from. They might want to also consider a fresh start or a new major when they return. And they may or may, not be eligible to return into the college that they were excluded from. I think that's the next slide. So exclusion is when the university, which has a policy of 3 semesters below a 2.0, and you are excluded from the university for 1 calendar year. That's a university policy that is supposed to be upheld throughout the university. But like I said, oftentimes students are just dismissed from the program and encouraged to go to another school or college. But technically, students are excluded after 1 year below, after 3 semesters below a 2.0, and they are excluded for 1 calendar year. And they get an exclusion hold. And generally speaking, we indicate when that exclusion has gone into effect so that anybody looking at that hold can calculate when that student can apply for reinstatement. Reinstatement is specific to the school or college. It might be a formal process with an application, specific due dates, paperwork that is processed, a committee that reviews it, and the student is put on a contract or an improvement plan. They can't register till their grades come in. Other schools might have something a little bit less formal. And some schools may not allow for reinstatement. If you're excluded from nursing, I'm not sure that you can return to nursing. You would have to work with that professional school or college. Same with engineering, maybe programs in pharmacy. So this slide is in no way guaranteeing any reinstatement for any program, but just that students generally apply for reinstatement to the program that they want to complete a degree in. So if you were excluded from class, and you want to come back into class, you would apply for reinstatement through the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. If you want to return as a communications major or an art major or theater major, you would have to apply for reinstatement to that school or college, and follow the process that they have in place.
So we also have a PowerPoint on GPA calculation. We don't have time to go through all of that today because it is in depth, but there is a separate PowerPoint on that where you'll learn how to calculate a GPA and then also go through some examples on calculating GPA as well. So now we're going to get into the art of probation, more of how to talk to students, what to think about when you're consulting your students. And you'll use a lot of the science part when you're talking with students, but communicating with students, especially in these times that are um, pretty delicate, is definitely an art. We're going to talk about how to support your students on probation, including balancing their class loads, helping them with recovery plans, giving them exception terms, and how to manage your caseload. So first, supporting students on probation, balancing class load conversation. Um, you have to prepare to have potentially difficult conversations with students. Not only are we having the, like I said, delicate conversation of you're on probation, your grades are low, we're getting close to possibly exclusion, but there could be other things going on outside of just the low grades in the students' lives that they are also trying to manage. It could be family situations, it could be possible home or food insecurity. And so there's a lot of other things happening in our students' lives because they're human and they have human experiences. And so just preparing to have those difficult conversations, preparing to have resources for students when they might need them, and just being prepared to really get in depth and not have that type of transactional approach to advising, especially with probation students. Um, we really have to think about and talk to the student about the balance between repeating courses and taking new courses when trying to raise GPA. Um, some things to consider is that classes that have lower grades, like an F grade, and higher credits, like a 5 credit course, would have a bigger impact on GPA when it's retaken. So if they retake a 5 credit F course and get a C or a B, that's going to help their GPA a lot more than repeating a D plus course and getting a C or a B. The likelihood of earning a higher grade, so that 5 credit F might be a high level chemistry course that the student's not sure that they still want to go into that area. That might not be the best course to repeat, especially if it's something that the student really struggled with and is not sure about being able to complete successfully. Um, you also have to consider the value of repeating a course that's no longer required, especially for those students who are changing their major or moved from one college into another. Do they still need the course that was previously failed or previously had the low grade? And is there value to taking a lower level elective course that might help them cushion their GPA? And would it be helpful for them to take the CPR course and, have that 2 credit cushion when they're moving forward into their harder classes? And lastly, what will financial aid pay for? So if financial aid isn't going to pay for it and the student is dependent on their aid in order to be able to pay for their classes, then that's also part of the conversation. And sending the student financial aid to understand what their aid will cover is an important piece that needs to be happening so that the student isn't getting into these classes and then finding out that they now have a new balance that they can't cover on top of everything else. When looking at recovery and improvement plans and making those for students, if you don't already have one in your department, the UAC does have a really cool improvement plan that covers a lot of the bases. So feel free to reach out and get that. I think it should be in your course as well. But the recovery plans, or what you do for your recovery or improvement plan, is school and college specific. Consider creating a plan for all the students on probation, or at least the students that you can handle, right? Because I know you all have big caseloads and some semesters can be worse than others, but your students are definitely, you'll definitely have a population of students on probation. Um, so your recovery plan could just be a detailed comment after you meet with a student, or a saved email after you've emailed back and forth with a student and made some sort of plan with them. These plans should have the feel of an agreement with the student, with expectations for how they raise their GPA, or what classes they should take in order to raise their GPA. When you're doing this through email, it's easy to just say, like, this is what I think you should do in order to complete raising your GPA to a 2.0. The recovery and improvement plan that we have goes through all of the steps of what they should do as well, which is pretty cool. All recovery conversations or plans should be saved and documented in the STARS notes so that we know what's going on and so that you can go back and look at it and say, okay, this is what we talked about without having to search through email or try to find a piece of paper that might have gotten lost in the shuffle. And if used for an exception term, make sure to add a hold for this on the student for the end of the whole end of the term for a grade check. This is a DE hold for class advisors. You may need to talk to whoever handles probation for your college in order to know exactly what hold to put on there. When giving students a exception term or deciding if you should consider the student's grades and GPA improvement. So did they get B's this past semester and it just wasn't enough to bring them above a 2.0? Are they listening when you're giving them suggestions on how to raise their GPA? And are they communicating with you and letting you know what's going on in their lives and how they can best be supported, what resources they're using? You should also consider the value of a break for the student's financial health or physical health to build academic skills at a community college, possibly if the student has that option. And then consult with others. You could have a formal meeting or a process with the other advisors in your department towards the end of term to make these decisions. Or if you don't have a formal process, even just having a couple students you're not sure on and taking it to one of your colleagues and saying, hey, do you have a couple minutes to review these cases so that we can make sure that we're being consistent across the department. And then finally, some case management strategies. You have to decide which students, not that are most important, but which students you can handle having communication with. If you have a lot of students and a large caseload, maybe having one-on-one conversations with each of those students isn't something that's possible. So which students are you going to communicate with? You could talk to all probation students or only the students that are P2 and getting closer to exclusion. I know for us, we kind of track our P2 registers a little closer, but we do a campaign for all the probation students, making sure that you're tracking and documenting what you're doing and the results of it. So I think that the campaigns are really great for this. You can track how many students are coming in, if they're meeting your expectation of 1 or 2 meetings, if they're communicating with you all through that campaign, and it's automatically put into stars, which is awesome. And then make sure that documented is any information that you get is documented for others to see as well. So don't just keep it in your email. You can use midterm grades, progress reports, and tutoring and SI information to figure out if you should do some mid-semester outreach to certain students. And then you can use different strategies throughout the term. So you may send one email at the beginning of the term, checking in on all of your probation students. And then after midterms, you might send a different email to just the students that have still low GPAs or low grades in their midterm grades. You could also change your strategies based on the population of students. So your P1 and P2, you might just throw into a campaign that all get the same email and you resend that email once every month and just make sure that you're communicating with them. Whereas your improvement plan students, you may require them meet with you so that you can check in and see how they're doing and if they need any resources from you. There are a lot of NACADA resources around probation. So there's NACADA webinars, NACADA literature, and the probation NACADA community of practice. So if you go to the NACADA website and type in probation, you can find a lot of information. I know that the ATA also does some NACADA webinars as a big group, and sometimes those can be around probation. We might have some recorded, I'm not sure. And with that, thank you for joining our presentation, for being here today. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the person that does probation in your office, especially if it's office specific, because they'll be the best people to talk to you about what their expectations are of you as an advisor. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Happy training.